श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रं धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवं यतीन्द्रप्रवणं वन्दे रम्यजामातरं मुनिं लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भां नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यम् अच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्टजीवजीवातवे नमः।
श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रं धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवम् यतीन्द्रप्रवणं वन्दे रम्यजामातरं मुनिं यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्टजीवजीवातवे नमः. So we continue with the exposition of the Mumuksupadi. Ishwaran Tanakke, 91st Sutra. ஈஸ்வரன் தனக்கே ஆயிருக்கும், அச்சித்து பிறர்க்கே ஆயிருக்கும், ஆத்மா தனக்கும் பிறர்க்கும் பொதுவாயிருக்கும் என்று முற்பட்ட நினைவு எண்ணிக்கே அச்சித்தை போலே தனக்கேயாக எனைக் கொள்ள வேணும் என்று வேணும் என்கிறதே நமஸ்ஸாது. And this is the original sutra, and it is commented upon in this manner. இந்நமஸ்துக்கு பூர்வத்தில் பிறந்த பிரதிபத்தியை பற்றி பற்றா இதில் பிறந்த பிரதிபத்திக்குண்டான வாசியை அருளிச் செய்கிறார். ஈஸ்வரன் தனக்கேயாயிருக்கும் என்று தொடங்கி, அதாவது ஸ்வரூபம் சுவாதந்திரம் பகவதைனம் சந்திரவதனே என்கிறபடியே சுவாதந்திரமே ஸ்வரூபமான ஈஸ்வரன் சுவார்த்தபரமாயே இருக்கும், சைதன்ய ரஹிதமாயாரே தனக்கே என் கைக்கு யோக்கியதை எண்ணிக்கே பாரதந்திர ஸ்வரூபமாயிருக்கும், அச்சித்து பதார்த்தமே ஆயிருக்கும். சதுர்த்தியில் சொன்ன சேஷத்துவத்தையும் மகாரத்தில் சொன்ன ஞாதிருத்வத்தையும் உடையரான ஆத்மா ஞாதிருத்வ பதத்தாரே சுவார்த்தத்தைக்கும் சேஷத்துவத்தாரே பரார்த்தத்தைக்கும் பொதுவாயிருக்கும் என்னே நமசுக்கு பூர்வபதத்தில் திறந்த பிரதிபத்தி. அப்படி எண்ணிக்கே பரார்த்ததைக வேஷமான வச்சித்து போதே தனக்கேயாக எனைக் கொள்ளுமீதே என்கிறபடியே அத்தனை ரசமாம்படி விநியோகம் கொள்ள வேணுமென்ற அபேட்சிக்கிறது நமஸ்ஸாதே எந்தை. So a few very important concepts are being mentioned in this sutra. There is a fundamental difference between the three main entities, namely Achit, Chit and Ishvara. So the first aspect is mentioned about the Ishvara. Ishwaran tanakke aayirukkum. I was mentioning in the earlier class, for example, this exists for whose sake does this object or entity exist? If the question is asked, since it is an achit vastu or an insentient entity or object, it exists purely for my sake. It does not exist for its own sake, because it does not have what we call in Sanskrit as swartha. Swartha literally means selfish, but in English selfish is the word selfish has a little bit of a derogatory shade of meaning. When you say selfish, it means a person who tries to sacrifice the well-being of others to achieve his own agenda, to achieve what he wants to achieve. So that is known as selfish. In this context, since it is an insentient entity, it does not have any volition of its own. It does not have any intention of its own. So it exists for the sake of others. Namely, others means not for the sake of some object like this. It exists for the sake of a Chetana. Another Chetana, it exists for the sake of a person or an entity that has consciousness. So, Achitte Pirarke Aayirukkum. So, this is an Achit Vastu. This exists only for the sake of others. Or another sentient entity, not an insentient entity. Ishwaran Tanakke Aayirukkum. The Supreme Lord, He exists for the sake of Himself. He is there on His own accord, for His own self, not for anybody else. So these are two contrasting, totally or mutually opposite qualities that exist in the Achit and Ishvara. So there is one other entity that is remaining among the three, that is Chit, Achit and Ishvara. That is Chit, or the individual soul, that is known as Atma. This Atma is different from the Achit in the sense it is a conscious entity. It possesses consciousness and is also of the nature of consciousness. I am sure you would be aware of this aspect of the Atma. That is, we call it as Jnanashrayatve Sati Jnana Gunaka. In Vishishtadvaita philosophy, this is dealt with in extensive manner. It is of the form of Chaitanya or consciousness, and also it possesses consciousness. So the consciousness that is an attribute of the Atman or Jivatma is known as Dharma Bhuta Jnana or attributive consciousness. So the oft-quoted example or analogy in this context is the lamp. So the lamp, which is lit, it is itself of the nature of light, and also it possesses light as an attribute because it actually shows the existence of other objects to us. So if a person has to see, there has to be light, because without the association of light, the eye cannot cognize anything. So just as the light or a lamp is of the nature of light and also possesses light as its attribute, the Jivatma is of the nature of consciousness and also possesses consciousness as an attribute. So for whose sake does the Jivatma exist is the main question. So there are two possibilities. He can exist for the sake of himself, or he can exist for the sake of the Ishvara, the Supreme Lord. These are the two possibilities. So Atma Tanakkum Virarkum Poduvairikkum Endru Murpattani Neivu. In the initial stage, there are two possibilities, in the sense that the Jivatma exists for his own sake or for the sake of the Ishvara. These are the two possibilities. So Swami Manavadamani explains it beautifully. the definition of the Jivatma is given as Jnatritve Sati Sheshatvam. One who possesses knowledge or consciousness and also at the same time possesses Sheshatva, subservience to the Supreme Lord, which goes without saying. So these are the two clauses. So if you say only Jnatritva, then that quality or attribute exists in the Ishvara also, so the definition will not be correct. If you say only Sheshatva, then that applies to the Achit also, so the definition becomes faulty. So Jnatritve Sati Sheshatvam, one that possesses consciousness as well as Sheshatva or subservience. So these two clauses which form the definition of the Jivatma give rise to two possibilities. It is correlated one to one, to mention it in the mathematical language. So, since he is the possessor of consciousness, since he is a Jnata, there is a possibility, or there is a very possibility that he feels that I exist for the sake of myself. Whereas if he has realized that Sheshatva is also one of his inherent natures, then he will realize that I exist for the sake of God or Ishvara. So these are the two possibilities which says the Jivatma is common, is a common entity or possesses a commonality or common attribute that either he can exist for himself or he can exist for the sake of Ishvara. Atma tanakkum pirarkum poduvairkum. Poduvairkum means he can either opt to exist for the sake of himself or he can opt to exist for the sake of Ishvara. So this is the difference, fundamental difference between Chit, Achit and Ishvara. Very, very important point we noted. That is the fundamental difference between the individual soul, the supreme soul, and Achit, or insentient objects, which is what the ontology in Vishishtadvaita is all about. So you can divide every entity in this world into these three categories: Chit, Achit and Ishvara. That is why we call it as Tattva-traya, three realities that exist in this universe. There is no entity that cannot be classified under these three. Therefore, we call it as Tattva-traya. And this is very much in accordance to the Vedic passage which says, Bhokta bhogyam preritaram chamatva sarvam proktam. So one is the Bhokta, another is the Bhogya, and another is the Prerita. The Jivatma is the Bhokta, enjoyer. The Achit is the Bhogya, and then Prerita is the Ishvara, who makes or allows or facilitates the Jivatma to enjoy all these things. This is before the Jivatma attains realization. After he attains realization, of course, the Jivatma also becomes a Bhogya, or an object of enjoyment to the Supreme Lord, which is what moksha is all about. So he says, Buddhalokacharya Swami says, Ishwaran tanakkeya irukkum achitte pirarkeya irukkum atma tanakkum pirarkum poduva irukkum endru mutpatta nineve. Achit anganannikke achitte pole tanakkeya enikkulla venumennu venum engirathu namassal. So in the initial stages, the Jivatma feels he exists for the sake of his own self. But as he starts evolving in the spiritual path, he realizes that this Jivatma is an object of enjoyment for the Supreme Lord. And submitting oneself as the object of enjoyment to the Supreme Lord gives greatest pleasure to this Jiva. So he says, the individual soul who is realized, he says, kindly accept this Atma, this soul, as an object of your pleasure, like you have accepted Achit. So though this Jivatma is a Chitvastu or a sentient entity, consider it to be an Achitvastu or an insentient entity, and you enjoy the pleasure that comes by the Jivatma associating with you. So that's what he says. Even he says, Anganannike achittai pole tanakkeya enaikulla venum engirathu namassa. There is no greater pleasure for this Jivatma or individual soul than submitting itself to the Paramatma as the object of his pleasure. Because if the Jivatma, if the Paramatma or the Supreme Lord Ishvara accepts this Jivatma as an object of his pleasure, then this Jivatma will start experiencing unlimited bliss, which arises from being subservient or being enjoyed, being an object of enjoyment of the Supreme Lord, who is so exalted, unsurpassed person. So that's what Tanakkeyaha enaikulla venum. Oh Lord, accept this Jivatma to be yours. Take this and enjoy yourself. Take this Jivatma and enjoy yourself. Then I will be, this Jivatma will be, we call it as Kritartha in Sanskrit. So then it attains fulfillment. There remains nothing else to be attained thereafter. So that's what it says. And the 92nd Sutra says, Adavade Bhogadashayil Ishwaranai Kumpodu Lokavenum Endre Aliyadolihai. It is commented upon in this manner. Tanakkeyaha endade upapadikkiraradavade ende todangi ittal attalakke rasamambadi viniyogappadeyavade tannode kalandu parimarum dashayil bhoktavana Ishwaran ஆட்கொள்வானோதென்னை இரண்டமாயன் என்கிறபடியே அடிமை கொள்வாரைப் போலே புகுந்து தன் வியாமோகத்தாலே தாழ நின்று பரிமாறி இத்தலையில் சேஷத்துவத்தை அழிக்கும் போது நம் சேஷத்துவத்தை நாம் நோக்க வேணுமென்று நைச்சம் பாவித்திராய்த்து அவன் போகத்தை அழியாதொழிகை என்கை. So what does it say? இத்தால் அத்தலைக்கே ரசமாம் படி விநியோகப்படுகையாவது தன்னோடே கலந்து பரிமாறும் தசையில் போக்தாவான ஈஸ்வரன். In Sanskrit, the Shastras, especially Mimamsa Shastra, there is a concept called Viniyoga. Viniyoga means what? Suppose I have of course, purpose is one way to interpret it. Purpose is one of the meanings. But it has a larger connotation in the sense, now I have let us assume that I have a lump of sugar in front of me. So it is sugar not in the form of granules or grains, but in India we have, I'm sure you have seen that in Srirangam and all over India, especially South India, where you have sugar in a crystallized form, especially in the red color. So now, suppose I keep it on the table in front of me, and somebody comes and says, "Why have you kept this sugar in front of you?" Then I say, "No, I want to have it. I want to enjoy it. Therefore, I have kept it." That means, in other words, you can also say, what is the application of this object? In the sense, what are you going to use it for? So that lump of sugar, or the sugar in the crystallized form, will become meaningful or become useful only when a person puts it on his tongue and relishes the sweetness that is associated with it. So the vinyoga, or the usage of the lump of sugar or crystallized sugar, is complete when a person puts it on his tongue and enjoys the sweetness of the lump of sugar. So similarly, the existence of the Jivatma will become meaningful only when the Supreme Lord considers and then accepts the Jivatma as an object of his enjoyment and accepts it and uses it for that purpose. Otherwise, suppose the lump of sugar, or kalkande as we call it in Tamil, if it is put in a what is it, we call it as dabba or something, a closed vessel or something like that, container, yes, you're right. You put it in a container and keep it in a shelf. What is the use? After some time, if the preservatives are not added properly, it will actually just become liquid or something, and it will lose its nature, and it becomes unfit for consumption. For example, if you keep jaggery in places like Melkote during winter, or in where it is very cold, so the jaggery will actually melt into liquid, and it will actually soil the entire place, or soil the entire container. So before it goes bad or it loses its nature, its original nature, you have to actually consume it. Or even for that matter, fruits. So suppose there is a very tasty mango. You have to wait for it to become ripe. And once it is optimally ripe, you have to immediately consume it. Because if you keep it like that only, then it will actually rot. And finally, you have to either throw it into the dustbin, or you have to give it to cows or do something like that. It becomes unfit for consumption. So a mango, the existence of a mango is very meaningful, is useful only when it is ripened to the core, or ripened to the optimal level, and then it is consumed by a human being when it is at its best. So similarly, the Jivatma, the existence of a Jivatma will become purposeful only when the Jivatma realizes that he is an object of enjoyment of the Supreme Lord, and gives him, sacrifices his own self for the enjoyment of the Jivatma. So, tanakkeyaha enakkollu ide. This is what one of the Alvars has said. Let him accept this Jivatma as an object of his enjoyment. That is what I ask for. I ask for nothing else. So this is the purport of this sutra. All Kulvano, and every moment the Jivatma, it should throb. When is the Lord going to accept me? When is the Lord going to accept me? When is the Lord going to accept me? So that is how the Jivatma should be. And this is what is actually mentioned by the word Namas or Namaha. So this should be the mindset of the Jivatma every moment. All the time he should be thinking, when is the Lord going to accept me? When is the Lord going to accept me? Is he going to accept me today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow? When? So constantly there should be a throb in the Jivatma that he should get accepted by the Paramatma as his, namely the Paramatma's object of enjoyment. So that is the Engirapadiye Adimai Kolvar Epole Puhundu Tanvyamo Attale Tadaninne Parimari Dashil Ittalail Sheshatwai Adikum Podu Nam Sheshatwai Nam no Kamenaminne Naityam Bhavitiraite Avan Bhogattai Adiyadurihe Engai Adikaikke we come to the 93rd Sutra. Adikaikke Kide Shullittu Menum Shullum Padivan Adikaikke Enna Varudichai Hirar Adikaikke Enna Tudangi Adavade Ishwaran Melurinde Vinyogan Kullu Hiradashile Ivan Naityam Bhavittiraite Avan Bhogattai Adikaikke Sheshatwame Atma Swarupamengayare Kire Pranavattire Shollitte Chaturthire Kinkara Svabhavana Shullhayare Melil Parattilum Shullum Yengai. Here, another very important or very important concept is mentioned, which is unique to the Sri Vaishnava philosophy. So in the Stotra Ratna of Swami Alavandar or Yamunacharya, who was the Pracharya of Ramanujacharya. So here you have to understand the one another nuance of the Sri Vaishnava philosophy. So a person who initiates the disciple by providing the Panchasamskara or imparting the Panchasamskaras or Samashrayana is known as the Acharya. So the Acharya's Acharya is known as Pra-Acharya. Prakrishtaha Acharya, Pracharya. So Acharya's Acharya is known as Pracharya. And Ramanujacharya was initiated by imparting the Samashrayanam by Mahapurna, who was his immediate Acharya. But Mahapurna was initiated by Yamunacharya. So Yamunacharya had 5 disciples, all of whom initiated Ramanujacharya into various aspects. For example, there is one of the acharyas was known as Sri Shailapurna. So Sri Shailapurna imparted the nuances of Ramayana to Ramanujacharya. So then Tirukkottiyur Nambiyar Goshti Purna, he initiated Ramanujacharya to the inherent secrets of the Rahasyatrayas. But Mahapurna or Periya Nambi was the person who initiated Ramanujacharya by providing Samashrayana. But Ramanujacharya in all places, by means of his verses, whether in the Vedartha Sangraha or Gita Bhashya, actually mentions the name of Yamunacharya only as his Acharya. So we have to know a little bit of historical background for this. So Mahapurna, though he initiated Ramanujacharya, never thought himself to be the Acharya of Ramanujacharya. He thought that he is an instrument of Yamunacharya only because Yamunacharya could not be physically present to initiate Ramanujacharya. He thought that he was only an instrument of Yamunacharya and initiated Ramanujacharya. So in the Shrivachana Bhushanam, there is a beautiful, beautiful narration of how the Guru Shishya Bhava or the preceptor-disciple relationship should be considered. So Shrivachana Bhushanam mentions that never should an Acharya who is initiating another person consider himself to be an Acharya. He should consider himself to be an instrument of his own Acharya. So suppose, for example, I am telling, don't take it in reality. I have been asked to initiate a person by performing samashrayanam. I should never think that I am initiating this person or I am giving samashrayanam to this person. I should always think that I am an instrument of my Acharya. So since I am initiated by my Acharya and the person whom I am supposedly initiating, he also becomes a disciple of my Acharya only. So I should consider the person whom I have initiated as my classmate, as my batchmate or my spiritual mate. So both of us, both myself and the person who is supposedly initiated by me, we both are the disciples of my Acharya. So I should never, in case I initiate somebody, supposedly that's why I am telling, I should not consider him to be my disciple. I should consider him to be my classmate, and both of us have been initiated by my Acharya. These are all great nuances of the Sri Vaishnava philosophy, which is mentioned in the wonderful works like Srivachana. So, one more important thing, that is why I came to mention this is, Ramanujacharya never actually praises, in many of his works, he never praises Mahapurna or his immediate Acharya. He always praises Yamunacharya as his Acharya, though Yamunacharya was his Pracharya, not his direct Acharya. This is because, according to some accounts, Mahapurna had extracted a promise from Ramanujacharya that he will never consider Mahapurna as his Acharya. This is a historical aspect. So Mahapurna, though he initiated Ramanuja, he considered Ramanujacharya as his own classmate, as mentioned in Srivachana later. There, the Stotra Ratna of Yamunacharya is one of the best stotras. That is why it is called as Stotra Ratna, the jewel among all the stotras. So he says, in the previous shloka, he says, Aham adyaiva maya samarpitaha, which is the essence of Sharanagati. This Atma has been offered by myself for your service. In other words, so it is being mentioned in passive voice. There are so many nuances. So if you can convert it into active voice, it means I am offering myself to you. But Yamunacharya does not say, he says, that's what he says. He says, Aham adyaiva maya samarpita. I have been offered by me to you. He says in a passive voice. That is in the previous shloka. Then in the next shloka he says, Mamanatha yadasmi yosmiham sakalam tadhi tavaiva madhava niyatasvam iti prabuddhati athava kinnu samarpayam. As soon as he says, I have been offered my me for your service, he says, the next shloka itself he says, O Lord, this Jivatma, this body, or everything that's associated with it, is already yours. So who am I to offer this Atma to you? Because already it belongs to you. So he says, Athava kim no samarpaya. What can I offer? So even the statement that this Jivatma or individual soul is offered by me to you is incorrect. Because who am I to offer? It already belongs to you. So since it's already, suppose this object belongs to Keshavdas, I say I am going to offer this to you as a present. Then he will laugh at me. Yeah, already it belongs to you. It's mine only. Who are you to offer it to? So that is what he says in the next shloka. And this is actually mentioned in, by Nammadvar also, it is being very beautifully mentioned. It say, when he says, Yanadavi tandodinde, I offer my Atma to you. And in the next, very next stanza, it says, Yanadaviya Yama. Who am I and who is this soul? It already belongs to you. So how can I offer what already belongs to you? How can I offer it to you once again? So this is the essence of Sharanagati. So that's what he says. Sheshaptum chaturthire kinkarasvabhavarahat cholluheyale melil padattilum shollum mingai. So this aspect is what is mentioned in the word Namaha. So ultimately, to put it in a nutshell, it means that the realization that this Jivatma belongs to the Paramatma is the summum bonum. You can put it like that. What is the summum bonum of this entire discussion? It means that one has to realize that this Jivatma belongs to the Paramatma and Paramatma alone. So the entire Mumuksupadi says this thing only. And once again it is underlined in this context also. And then he once again glorifies this. Inninaive piranda pode kritakyan inninavillada podu ella dushkritangalum kritam. 94th Sutra. And then inninaville ella sukritangalum undu idannike irikka annam yajnadiganam prayashchittadiganam nishprayojanangal iradannale ella papangalum pom ella phalangalum undam. So literal meaning of this sutra is very simple. Inninavile ella sukritangalum inninave pirandapode kritakrityan. As soon as the realization dawns upon the person, that is, I am telling, not knowledge but realization. So I may feel, yes, I have already, I know that this Jivatma is subservient to the Lord. No. The realization has to happen. That means you have to know the nature of the Jivatma, you have to know the nature of the Paramatma, and then only the realization can occur. So if I feel that already it is mentioned in Mumuksupadi and I have realized, no. Because if I have realized, then what will be my behavior? My Acharya used to say, if that realization comes, he cannot sit here and give sermons. He will become an introvert, and he'll never come out. He'll never expose himself to society. All the things that are mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in the Daivasura Sampad Vibhaga Yoga, where he talks about Daiva Yoga, Daivi Sampat and Asuri Sampat. So all the things mentioned in Daivi Sampat will come to him, and he will never expose himself or show himself off as a devotee or something like that. So realization is the right word. So that realization has to occur. So in Ninaivile, he says, in Ninaiva Piranda Pode Kritakrityam. As soon as the realization that he is totally subservient to the Lord dawns upon him, he becomes Kritakrityan. Kritakritya means all things that are ordained to be done by him are as good as achieved. That is what is the meaning of the word Kritakritya. Similarly, in Ninaivilla Podo Ella Dushkritangalum Kritam. Until a person feels or thinks that he is independent, then Ella Dushkritangalam Kritam, all sins are deemed to have been performed or done by him, committed by him. So once again, same thing he says, in Ninavil Ella Sukritangalam Undu Irannike Rekkapannam Yajnadihanam Prayashchittadihanam Nishprayojanangal. On the other hand, in Ninevile Ella, so in Nineveh means again and again. Again and again, what do you call it? So, continuously remembering the fact that he is subservient to the Lord is in Nineveh Ella Sukritangalum Kritam. All good deeds are deemed to have been committed by such a person who has this realization and goes over it, thinks about it again and again and again and again. On the other hand, if he does not possess such a realization, then all the sacrifices like Yajnadihanam, Prayashchittadihanam, Nishprayojanangal. So he may perform several Vedic sacrifices. He may perform several Prayashchitta karmas. All of them are meaningless. And then he also says, Idu Jannale Ella Papangalum Pom Ella Phalangalum Undam. And once this realization dawns, all the sins will get washed away and all the good virtues will come to him automatically. So if such a realization exists, everything will be meaningful. And further, he need not do anything. On the other hand, if such a realization does not exist, then everything he performs is meaningless. So ultimately, the realization that this Jivatma is totally subservient to the Paramatma is what is the sum and substance of Sri Vaishnava philosophy. Not only Sri Vaishnava philosophy, any philosophy for that. Though it may be mentioned in different words, etc. Ultimately, this is the truth. So this is commented upon very beautifully by Swami Manavana Mauni, and he says, in Nineve Piranda Pode Kritakrityam Nindari Tanakkeya Enikkullavenum in Vatyanta Paratantri Pratipatti Piranda Pode Tannudiya Hitatte Kudalaha Cheyavendadallam Shade Tarakatinavengai in Ninevilla Pode Ella Dushkritanganam Kritam Yenade. Paratantriyam Paratantriya Pratipatti Illada Podo Chintena Nakatam Papam Chorena Atma Paharina. So a very beautiful verse is quoted here. It says, Yo anyatha santamatmanam anyatha pratipadyate kintena nakritam papam chorena atma paharina. Which means, if a person comes to the conclusion that this Jivatma is an independent entity which exists for its own sake, then such a person becomes a thief. And there is no sin that is not deemed to have been committed by him. He is deemed to have committed all sins because he is a chora or thief. So who is a thief? Suppose this object belongs to me, belongs to someone else, and I take it away without his knowledge or by force, then I am called a thief. Similarly, this Jivatma belongs to the Paramatma, this individual soul belongs to the Supreme Lord. So if I take it that it exists for myself, that means I have stolen an object belonging to the Supreme Lord and used it for my own sake. That is why such a person is called as a thief. So that's why it says, Kinte nanakritam papam, which sin cannot be deemed to have been committed by him. He is deemed to have committed all sins because he is a chora. Chora means thief, who has Atma Paharina, who has stolen the Atma. Stolen the Atma? How, sir? This Jivatma is there here in me only. How can I could have been deemed to be stolen it? No. This Jivatma does not belong to you. It belongs to Supreme Lord. If you think that it belongs to you, then it means you have stolen it from him. So you have to be very, very, very careful. Then he says, Nikke undagum yajnadiyanam prayashchittadiyanam enne. In the Paratantya Pratipatyan Annike Irikkat Cheide Ishvara Prenanarthamaha Yan Pannam Yajnadi Karmanganam Tan Papa Vimojanarthamaha Pannam Kichachandra Dihana Hira Prayashchittadihanam Ishvara Pritikum Swarupa Vimojanatikum Udalaha Mayane Nishprayodanangal. So without this realization, if you perform some yajnas, so what is the meaning of yajna? Yajnangalam, he says. So yajna means yaja deva pujaya. The word yajna means a propitiatory ritual that is conducted to please the Supreme Lord. So Ishvara Prityarthamaha, because the yajnas are those rituals that are ordained to be performed in the Vedas. And the Vedas are nothing but the orders of the Supreme Lord. Shruti Smritir Mamaiva Ajna. That's what Lord says. So, the orders of the Lord, which are in the form of yajnas or Vedic sacrifices, should be carried out purely with the intention of propitiating the Lord. Because Yajnaradhya Vishnu Sarvakarma Samaradhya is what is the name of the Lord, which means he is the one who is worshipped by all karmas, whether it is Sandhya Vandana, Samita Dana, Upasana, or Vaishwadeva, any ritual for that matter. All the rituals are performed for his pleasure only, to invoke his pleasure only. And all these have to be performed with the realization that I am not performing them I am not the ownership. I don't have the ownership. It is he who is making me perform this propitiatory sacrifice. So this is with regard to yajnas. And then prayashchittadi karmas. Prayashchitta karmas are several in nature because knowingly or unknowingly we commit so many sins. So the sins can be washed off only by means of prayashchitta. So that is why he says, Manavana Mamani says, Krishna Chandrayana Vihalale. Suppose I eat something that is unfit to be consumed by a devotee. So suddenly some relative forces me to eat onion. Of course, I don't do it. Suppose it happens. So a person who is very pure, he does not consume onion or garlic. But his friends or close relatives, they insist and they also threaten him. If you don't consume onion today along with us, we will think that you are our enemy or something like that. So it is also the duty of a person to make others happy, of course, but within the limits, I am telling. That doesn't mean that we can exceed our limits. Suppose it happens, or suppose somebody offers some dish without disclosing that it has onion, and I consume one handful of it without realizing. Then what do I do? So when I was young, I remember I went generally, though to give I would narrate an incident that I am associated with. So in our house, my uncles and other close relatives, they are not all following the traditional practices. So generally, my parents would never allow me to have any food in their immediate relatives' houses also. But sometimes my uncles and aunts, they would force me to have food, saying that it is prepared according to the tradition, etc. So once I went to Chennai and I had to, my parents were not accompanying me, I had gone with my cousins. And then without my knowledge, I was served a dish which contained onion in it. So luckily I could actually make out that from the smell that this sambar contains onion, and I said, I will not take food at all. And immediately I stood up and I said, no, I will not take this food. But in case I were to have taken it, but one good thing what happened to me and people like me is we don't like the smell of onion at all. So we actually detest onion and garlic. So there is no need for somebody to prohibit us from eating onion and garlic because we don't like that smell at all. So there is no question of us consuming it. But it happened, then I withdrew from the meal and I had some fruits, etc. But suppose without knowledge he consumes onion, then what to do? Then there are several prayashchittas that are mentioned in the Dharmashastra works of Sanskrit, the Smriti works. They are known as Chandrayanadi, Krishna Chandrayanadi. So Krishna, so they say Pradapatya Krishna, that Krishna, so many Krishna karmas are mentioned. And also Chandrayana Vrata. Chandrayana Vrata means there are several number of vratas which is even today very much prevalent in the Madhva tradition. So they also, and many Vaishnava traditions also. For example, the persons belonging to Swaminarayan sect, they also perform the Chandrayana rituals very meticulously. Even Jains perform Chandrayana. So It's even today it is in practice. So that is why, but they say Chandrayanari Vratas. Chandrayana means controlling the food. That is, there is an ascending order and descending order where you gradually reduce your food. So if it is 32 handfuls, every day you go on reducing it and you make it 1 handful on the 32nd day. And once again you go on increasing it to the normal. Then you have Shaka Vrata, Radhi Vrata, and so many other type of vratas. That is, the vratas having particular vegetables as consumables and avoiding of certain vegetables. Then Shaka Vrata, then you have Dadhi Vrata, Kshira Vrata, consuming milk only and nothing else for a given period of days. Consuming water only and consuming nothing else for a given number of days. Several hundreds of vratas have been mentioned. These also are ordained to be performed, but all these with the realization that this Jivatma is subservient to the Supreme Lord alone. If it is done, if these Krichras and Chandrayanas are done without this realization, then it is a waste of time, waste of energy, waste of resources, because it is totally useless. Which Pilladokacharya, Swami Pilladokacharya, very categorically mentions. So finally he says, Irudannale, and then Irudannale, Ella Papangalum Pom, Ella Palangalum Undam, Yendade, the Paratantra Pratipatyale, Ishwaran Nivananavine, Anugrahadishete Panahayare, Vanudia Nigrahat, Sakala Papangalum Pom, Nadiar, Kenchaiven, Iritini, and Gira, Badie, Ganaki, Yetchayomene. மேன்மேலும் உபகரிக்கையாரே சம்சார நிவர்த்தி தொடக்கமான கைங்கரிய பிராப்தி பரியந்தமாக சகல பலங்களும் உண்டாம் என்கை. Finally he says, இதனாலே எல்லா பாபங்களும் போம். This realization bestows the aspect that all the sins will be washed off and all good fruits, good results will come to him. So once the Jivatma realizes his total subservience to the Supreme Lord, what happens? The Supreme Lord becomes subservient to the Jivatma. That is the greatness of the Supreme Lord. So that is why in one of the Haridasas in Kannada, they actually sing, Huva taruvavara manige hulla taruva. If you serve the Lord by offering him fruits, flowers, he will serve you by becoming your servant and he will bring the grass that is required to feed your cows. So we have a story or anecdote in Mahabharata where Lord Krishna comes and brings the grass to feed the horses of Arjuna. And then he also feels, as I mentioned in the story of Ramanujacharya and Somashyanda, even if I give myself to him, I will not be able to repay the debt that he has given me. So what else can I do for him? What else can I do for him? The Lord will start thinking, oh, I cannot repay his debt. So he says, so how can I repay the debt that he has given me? By giving himself to me. That's what the Lord thinks. And he says, how much ever I do, I repay him, I will remain a debtor and he will remain a creditor. So he says, samsara nivarti tudakkamana kainkariya prapti pariyantamana sakala phalangalum mundu. So the Lord bestows upon him moksha, which is the doing away of samsara or the material world and giving him an exalted place in Vaikuntha and engaging in his career, and several other such benefits that the Supreme Lord will bestow on the Jivatma. So in a way, our duty is relatively simple. We always have to say, I am your Lord, I am your servant, I am your servant, I am your servant, I am your servant, I am your servant. And continuously, we call it as Anusandhana in Sanskrit. Realize that and continuously keep on repeating it is what is the essence of the Ashtakshara Mahamantra. And it is also the essence of Namaha. Aha Madhyama Padartattai Arudichaidarait. Thus he concludes the explanation of the word Namaha, which is the middle word. Om Namaha Narayana. He says, so Manavadamana, he says, with this sutra, he concludes the explanation of the middle word, that is Namaha. So one more word is remaining, Narayanaya, which is the next sutra. Narayanam yendrathe narangalukku ayanam yennapadi. So this word Narayanaya has two components, two units, Narayana and Aya. So that is in the word Narayana, and then the suffix which takes the form of Aya. So another 20 sutras are remaining in the Tirumantra Prakarana. So hopefully we will complete it early. So I hope I have been able to give you some information about the sutras that we have dealt today. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any feedback? Most welcome.
Swami, you were talking about Namaha, the meaning of the word Namo, Namaha, and so we have to understand that we are also not for our own purpose, for our own sake, and so what about people who are kaivalyartis, people who are trying for kaivalya moksha, kaivalya mukti? They're simply thinking of their own selves, no? How can they get moksha?
To be very honest with you, in the Sampradaya Granthas, it is specifically mentioned, and even Ramanujacharya mentions when he says in the commentary of the word Artho Jignya of this verse, Artho Jignasur Artharthi Jnani, he says Jignasu is Kaivalyarthi. But apart from the Sampradaya works and the few references, to be very honest, I have not got any Vedic reference. That doesn't mean what is being told I am negating it or I am refuting it or I am not accepting it. I am really unable to understand from where, how this thought of Kaivalyarthi, who enjoys his own self and not the Supreme Lord. So they mention it in the physical manner that he is situated outside Vaikuntha in a room-like structure where he keeps on enjoying the bliss of his own self rather than the Supreme Self. But I don't come across any Vedic evidence that Kaivalya means this, because as far as Sanskrit language is concerned, this is I am telling it out of, you can say it is out of my ignorance, or also since I am not very, I don't have the required knowledge in this regard. Because according to Sanskrit language and also the general philosophy, general Indian Vedic philosophy, Kaivalya, Moksha, etc. are synonyms. Mukti Kaivalya Nirvana Shreyo Nishreyasa Mritam. So, but when you see the word etymology of the word, Kevalasya Bhavaha Kaivalya. So Kevala means only one person, individual. So the bhava or the uniqueness of Kevala, unique dharma of Kevala is Kaivalya. That way we get that meaning. But I am yet to come across the authentic, any Vedic evidence is there with regard to how we are interpreting. Even I have discussed it with many senior scholars, including my own revered father. They also say, yes, as it has been mentioned in the Sampradaya works, we accept it. There is no, I am not negating it, or I have no objection in that. But where is the original evidence that it is so? I am yet to be convinced personally. So that is the answer that I would like to give to your question.
May Adian please ask a question?
Yes, yes.
You quoted a verse that ended with the line Kim tena na kritam papam chorena natma paharina. Where does that come from? Does it state where that?
Sorry?
You mentioned the verse that ends in.
What is the source of this verse?
The source of the verse. Does it say?
I'll find out and tell you, or you can search on Google now, which is very easy.
Okay.
Or I'll find out and tell you.
And the second question I have is, would it be possible for you to say a few words about the name of Sri Manavala Mamunigal? I've noticed that he has various names like Sri Varavara Muni, Sri Jamatri Muni, and looking at the Sanskrit and looking at the meaning of the word, it looks like it refers to, all of his names referred to the word bridegroom.
Yes.
As a name of of the Supreme Lord. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it is actually the name of this presiding deity of Srirangam. He is known as Alahiya Manavalan. Alahiya Manavalan means the beautiful son-in-law. So son-in-law of whom? Son-in-law of Kshetrabdi, or the Milky Ocean, from which goddess Lakshmi emanated. So in Tamil Nadu there is a tradition. So all the persons who belong to the bride's family, they will refer to the bridegroom as Maapillai, or son-in-law. So not only the father-in-law and mother-in-law mention their son-in-law as son-in-law, but all people who are associated with the bride, they will call him as Maapillai only. Maapillai enna pandrar. They will say, what is the son-in-law doing? So we all consider ourselves, so the Kshira Samudra, the personification of the Milky Ocean. We can, in the Shiva Vaishnava philosophy, there is a very unique tradition that you can identify with any person who is a devotee of the Lord. So you can identify yourself with the Milky Ocean, because he also gave goddess Lakshmi as the wife of Lord Narayana with great devotion. So he, just like we consider Jambavan. So Jambavan is one of the greatest devotees of Lord Krishna. But not only he is the devotee, he is also the father-in-law of the Lord. So similarly, you have Periyalvar or Vishnu Chitta. He is the greatest devotee of the Lord, but he is also the father-in-law of the Lord, because he gave Andal or Goda Devi, his daughter, in marriage to the Lord. So you can, in Shiva Vaishnava philosophy, you can identify yourself with these persons also. You can identify yourself with Periyalvar, because he gave his daughter to Lord Ranganatha only. Because when Andal or Goda Devi was offered, so I am sure you have heard about the word Swayamvara in Sanskrit. So in those days, the days of yore, when there used to be a beautiful, beautiful princess, the princess would be, there would be an event or ritual where all the princes from the neighboring or the different kingdoms of the country, they would be invited. And then they would all be in a beautiful hall. They would all be seated on thrones. And then the princess would be given a beautiful garland. And she is introduced to all the princes individually. Then, so she will have some likes. She will have some idea of how her husband should be. So she will select the whom she feels is the best person to be her suitor. So we call them as, in English, we call them as suitors. That means all of them are potential bridegrooms who are ready to marry the bride. So in case of Goda Devi or Andal, she said, I will marry the Lord only and none else. So who are the suitors? So then Periyalvar or Vishnu Chitta asked, there are 108 lords, whom, though all of them are Lord Vishnu or Narayana only. He said 108 Divya Deshas are there, chosen sites. Which lord would you like to marry? So all the 108 lords were the suitors. Then Andal said, I will marry Lord Nandanatha and no other person. So in a jovial sense, we say all the other 107 people were disappointed that they could not marry Andal. So it was the privilege of Lord Ranganatha. So he became the son-in-law. So, and also we say, to give a very modern example, we say, for example, we say Washington is saying like this, New Delhi is saying like this, or Islamabad is saying like this. So when you say Washington is saying like this or London is saying like this, what does it mean? Washington is not a person. So Washington is saying like this means the American president is telling like this, or American government is telling us. So you say Washington is forcing us to do this, or London is forcing us to do this. That means what? London means the government that is ruling over London or UK is telling us to do this. So in India, we say, in India we have a saying that he is the son-in-law of this place. So the Lord Ranganatha is the son-in-law of Srivilliputturu, we say. Because that is where. And when we say, talk about Rama in the Ramayana. So Lord Rama is the son-in-law of Mithila, we say. So like that, the Lord Ranganatha is known as Alahiya Manavalan, the beautiful bridegroom. So that name was given to Manavala Mamuni or Varavaramuni, which is the same. So Manavalan means bridegroom. So the name of the Lord, so just as we name children as Rama, Krishna, Govinda, Mukunda, etc. You know the Ajamala Upakhana well, and Keshavdas ji is a great exponent of Bhagavatam. I need not mention about that. So the names of the lords are given to the children. So Manavala Mamuni or Varavaramuni is the name of the Lord of Srirangam, namely Varavaramuni or Manavala Mamuni or Sundara Jamata. In Sanskrit he is called as Jamata, means son-in-law. So Sundara Jamata means the beautiful bridegroom or the beautiful son-in-law. So that is why he was given that name. So the name, just as we call the name people as Ranganatha, etc., same name is Alahiya Manavalan. So in Melkote also, we had a person who was named as Alahiya Manavalan. So that is the significance of the name of Varavaramuni or Manavala, Mahamuni. So Manavala is his name. Mahamuni means Mahamuni, the great sage, which is an honorific given to the Acharya. So I hope I have answered your question, though it's It was a long answer. What is the literal meaning of Krishna? I have to find out. Krishna is generally an offering that is, I would like to put it like this, an offering that is given as atonement. So we say prayashchitta. Prayashchitta means atonement. That is the exact and literal and exact translation. So we have several type of krichras or atonements. So giving a godana, bhudana, hiranyadana, etc. So if you commit a crime unknowingly or knowingly, sometimes you are forced to do it or something like that. Then to, for example, we say in the Puranas, you see that Indra was afflicted by the Brahmahatya dosha because he killed Vritra. Though he was a demon, he was supposed to be a Brahmin also, so he came in Indra, killed Vritra, he was afflicted by the Brahmahatya dosha. But it is symbolically mentioned, then he gave it to these people, he gave it to cows, he gave it to women, etc. It is mentioned in the Purana. It's a different story. But Krishna is something that is given in atonement for a sin committed. So that is what it is. So it might be in the form of some money or in the form of cows. Or that's why I said Godana, Bhudana. And the Godana means giving a cow in charity. Bhudana is giving away some lands in charity. Or Hiranyadana, giving away money in charity. That is what is known as Krishna.
Swami, also from today's class, even though you explained about how the Acharya feels that, the disciple is his co-disciple, and that, the disciple is actually the disciple of his Acharya. But even though he thinks like that, because that's his advancement, that etiquette between the disciple who has taken Diksha from that Acharya would still be fully applied, isn't it? He cannot treat that person as his co-disciple.
The disciple should not consider the Acharya as his classmate or something.
Exactly.
That's a great sin, actually. So the Acharya should consider this disciple as his Satirthya or classmate, as we call him. Classmate is not the spiritual mate, I would like to say. But of course, the disciple should never consider the Acharya in that way. Yes, you are right.
Do Sri Vaishnavas ever do any of these kritra tapasyas?
Yes, of course. As part of the different samskaras, they do it. And all the Vedic rituals, they are ordained to be performed. Even though a person might become a realized soul, Ramanujacharya very specifically says, all the Vedic things that are ordained to the person to be done, they have to be performed, but phalasanga kartritva tyaga purvakam. That's what Ramanujacharya says in the Bhagavad Gita. Even Kamya karmas, for example, because according to the Sri Vaishnava, strict Sri Vaishnava tradition, there are two types of karmas, that is Nitya karma and Kamya karma. So Nitya karmas are those that are performed on as daily rituals like Sandhya Vandanam, etc. Kamya karmas are the karmas or the sacrifices, etc. that are performed with attaining some particular fruit or result in mind. The classical example given is Chitraya Jeta Pashukama. So the Vedic passages say, if a person is desirous of attaining sort of cattle, which was a symbol of prosperity. So today you have yachts or seafront villas or something like that, or you own some planes or helicopters or something which are a symbol of prosperity. In those days, the symbol of prosperity was having many cows. That is a great, very, very significant issue why they thought that cows were the symbol of prosperity. I will not go into that detail. It's a very interesting thing anyway. So if a person wants to attain thought of cattle, then he has to perform a sacrifice called Chitra. This is mentioned in the Vedas. So these are known as Kamya Karmas. But the Sri Vaishnava texts say that the Kamya Karmas are to be totally avoided by Sri Vaishnavas, because a Sri Vaishnava doesn't have any Kama at all. He doesn't have any wish at all. Therefore, all the Kamya Karmas are to be avoided strictly. But here once again, we have to think properly. Some people will think that they are Sri Vaishnavas and they will avoid Kamya Karmas, but they will be doing all the things. It's not so. So even Kamya Karmas can, in the ideal condition also, Ramanujacharya says, Kamya Karmas also can be performed, but purely as Bhagavad Prityartha or Bhagavad Kainkariya Rupa. As a service to the Supreme Lord, it can be done. There is nothing wrong in doing it. In fact, if it is done, it is good. So definitely all the Nitya Naimittika Karmas or even Kamya Karmas are to be performed, even by a realized soul who has realized that he is totally subservient to the Supreme Lord, purely with the intention of propitiating or pleasing him.
So people are doing like the Kushmanda Homa.
Yes, any Homa, if it is mentioned in the Vedas, to perform it with the ultimate aim of pleasing the Lord, yes, it's acceptable.
Would you say
Even,
that it's... Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, would you say it's not all? It's also done as an example for those who are not prapannas, those who are not, following the Sri Vaishnava line.
I could not get the last sentence.
I was saying that, would you say it's also being done by Sri Vaishnavas to set a good example for those who are not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Ramanujacharya says, in the Bhagavad Gita Bhasha, he says, no person should actually give up the karmas at any cost. Even if he has become an realized soul, if he is in the midst of society, of course it applied to those days, now nobody cares. If he is in the midst of society, he should actually perform those karmas without fail. In the commentary of the shloka, Yadyadacharati Shrestha Tattadeva Itarojanaha Sayat Pramanam Kurute Lokastaranvartate. I'm sure you are familiar with the shloka in Bhagavad Gita. So if he being a realized soul, if he gives up karma, then others who are unrealized souls also will start imitating him. And then what happens? Since they are unrealized souls, they actually will lose their status. The status means they will lose their moorings by giving up the karmas. And this person who, though he is realized but not performing the karmas, will be responsible for that person to become a patita or a fallen soul. So the responsibility of a realized soul is very, very great, because if he fails to perform the karmas, and if some other person who is unrealized also imitates him by not performing the karmas and he becomes a fallen soul, then this person will be responsible for the fall of the unrealized person, and he will have to pay a large price. So until he is in the midst of society, even if he becomes a realized soul, he has to perform the karmas. That's what Ramanujacharya says.
Of course, that's according to the society that we live in now, and especially in the Western society. Then you'll have to apply that in a different way, wouldn't you? Because maybe a lot of these karmas wouldn't be really of an example to set for people in the West, maybe the best thing to set is to be how a good devotee of the Lord and how to serve the Lord. That's what's more applicable. So therefore, there's no sin in not performing these activities, especially if you're in a Western society, as is in a society applicable, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So that is why one thing is of course, even in India today has become totally westernized. So we cannot, today we can say Indians are more westernized than Westerners. So even in India, it doesn't matter probably. But we have to take the spirit of it and do accordingly. Acedramangeta chatura chaturakshari amavastham prapadyante jantavo antamadrisha punyambodya vikasaya papadvan takshayaya cha Shriman avirabhut bhumau Ramanuja Divakaraha Trinīkrita virinchādirankushay bhūtayaha Ramanuja padambhoja samashrena shalinaha. Thank you very much, everyone.